Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each program, we talk about important public policy issues. We hope you'll discuss those same issues, and then at election time, you'll be ready and willing to go vote. This time, we're going to be talking about going green in Nebraska, and to do that, we have John Hansen, who's the president of the Nebraska Farmers Union and also co-chair of the Nebraska Wind Working Group. Welcome, John.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be on your program, and thanks to the Nebraska League of Women Voters for all of the good educational works that you do, and it's been our pleasure to work and partner with you for many, many years.
Yes, thank you. Well, tell our viewers briefly about the Nebraska Farmers Union and its mission.
Nebraska Farmers Union is a general farm organization. We're 104 years old. And by general farm organization, that means that we represent family farmers and ranchers of all sizes and stripes. So we have very large, medium, and small producers who raise all different kinds of crops and commodities and livestock and market them in all different kinds of ways. And what unifies us is our commitment to our traditional system of independent family farmer, owner-operator agriculture, and we think that is the best system that protects the natural resources, maximizes the economic benefits to our society, provides the most social benefits to society as a whole as we think about how we tie ourselves back to the land from which we are all connected to in one way or another, and that it's also the system that's the most consistent with our traditional values as an American democracy. So that's our guiding principle. And so we're a big tent. We have lots of different independent ideas in it. And so we work to practice the basics of civil society, and we can have lots of disagreements, but we try not to be too disagreeable.
Okay. So how does going green fit in with that? What will it take to go green in the state of Nebraska?
Really several ways it fits in, and we've been very much involved in the development of renewable energy in our state, going all the way back to the 40s in the case of ethanol, in the early 90s with wind, and the mid-90s with solar, and all of those because with our natural resource base, it makes sense for us to do value-added agriculture. And so we're taking our natural resource base and we're more fully utilizing it in a constructive way. We are creating fuels and energy that is beneficial to the environment, beneficial to the economic base of the rural community. So these are new markets, new ways to make money for folks who are struggling with traditional commodities. And it's also a part of our commitment to be good stewards of the natural resources that we are responsible for. So it's a part of our basic stewardship ethic. And so conservation, renewable energy, all of those things fit together for us.
Okay. Well, when we talk about renewable energy, I think a lot of people primarily are thinking solar and wind. And we know Iowa and Kansas have lots of wind and lots of wind farms. What about Nebraska? What is our potential for wind and solar?
Nebraska has the third best wind resources in the nation. We're about 18th in the total as we rank compared to other states. Our neighbors to the south, Kansas has comparable wind resources that we do. They've got about 3.7 times more wind resources developed. Iowa has not quite as good a resources as we do, and they have 5 times as much wind developed. So Nebraska is getting there. We now have 1,328 megawatts of wind. The last 3 to 4 years has been our biggest spurt in terms of development. So we're really excited about that. It's a very good thing. Brings a lot of good paying jobs to rural communities, a lot of new value to family farmers and ranchers for the easements, and creates a new set of capital investment and new tax base and property tax relief. And so it is a big deal in rural Nebraska.
Okay. So now then what does corn have to do with renewables when we talk about corn? Are we talking ethanol primarily?
Well, in the case of corn, Nebraska is the third leading producer of corn in the nation. And so it makes good sense for us to utilize our corn that we produce and find uses for it. So ethanol uses about 43% of our corn crop, where it transforms it, takes out the starch, leaves us with a high quality protein feed that we also use for our dairy and our beef industries. And so it's a very good fit for us. It gives us a competitive advantage over other livestock producing states. So thanks to our ethanol industry, we're the top red meat producing processing state in the nation. So it goes hand in glove with that. It is the biggest source of rural economic development in our state. It is a primary economic driver. It's created a host of new additional economic opportunities as we continue to more fully develop the potential of those kernels. And so from an economic standpoint, it's a big winner. So the things that I think about in terms of the environmental side of ethanol is that according to the Department of Energy, it reduces carbon monoxide 30%, and depending on how much you factor in the land use implications, which get into arguments between friends, we're somewhere between 34 and 44% reduction in greenhouse gases. That's significant. And so from the environmental standpoint, there's no question that the tailpipe drippings are substantially better. The greenhouse gases represent a substantial reduction. And so while it helps create a very substantial new economic base in rural communities, from a consumer standpoint, the numbers that we crunch says that fuel users in the state of Nebraska receive $100 million in savings because of the value that ethanol brings to the price reduction in the price of fuel that we put in our vehicles. That's a lot of money.
Okay. So the charge by some that it's not really quite as green as some would say, you would dispute that?
Well, we certainly dispute it, and it's an improvement. It's a part of the renewable mix. It represents a substantial improvement, and it kind of falls into the category of that old saying, which makes some sense, is that we ought to not let something that's substantially better and an improvement be the enemy of perfect, because we don't have perfect at this point. But if we can reduce our greenhouse emissions in Nebraska by a third by putting ethanol in our vehicles, that's a big deal. And so, when you look at the big picture, in 2013's data, we, through the use of ethanol, put an equivalent of 8 million cars off the roads by that amount of carbon reduction. That's significant.
It's significant. Okay. Well, how about Nebraska? How are we doing with solar and wind? What?
We are moving forward with solar. We have about 8 megawatts of solar in the state developed. That's a big jump from what we were 3 years ago. We've got a bunch of other good-sized community projects that will be larger than even the Lincoln Electric System project on the western edge of Lincoln. So we've got projects in Kearney and Lexington, and a lot of smaller projects coming on board, as well as commercial solar, residential solar, lots of different kinds of configurations of solar. In our view, solar is really starting to kind of hit its stride. We've got good solar resources. We are 13th in the nation in potential. But if you look at the data, the top 3 states are in the Southwest, obviously. And then between number 4 and number 15, there's very little difference, really, in the solar potential in those states, and Nebraska's in those states. And so we're in what I would like to think of as the second tier, which is still excellent. So we're looking, as we do in wind, at all the impediments to solar development, and we try to focus on these things at the Wind and Solar Conference, where are the sticking points? How do other states address this that are ahead of us? How do we kind of bring the best and brightest among us together to brainstorm fixes? And then we look at trying to implement those things, and through that process, we've helped move both wind and solar forward.
Okay. And you would say that wind is good for rural and urban areas. What about in the rural areas? Why is wind really good for our rural parts of the state?
In the case of wind plays a big role in the development of new tax base, new farm income, new good-paying jobs. A lot of these kids that come out of Northeast Community College, which is close to my home in Madison County, they're a waiting list for those kids when they come out of that school. They're starting out in the upper 40s, 50s, $60,000 area. In rural communities, those are really good-paying jobs with benefits. So it's a good way to keep rural kids in rural communities, diversifying your base. The tax benefits are tremendous. What it does to the local school districts, the county tax base, and these are taxes that stay on as long as the project is enforced. So we've got a very user-friendly state policy that we help craft to make sure that we have a good steady income over a long period of time that helps move development forward, but also gives communities something that they can count on rather than doing a big flush of income for 3 or 4 years until depreciation is hit, and then so it's boom and then gone, which is not very usable. Where we have a good steady stream for the life of the project, we think that this is really a win-win.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about current renewable use in the Omaha area with OPPD. I think that currently there's about 32% renewable energy being used, but they're saying they just announced that that was going to go to 40% in the next 2 years. So an 8% increase in 2 years. Is that significant? And what about beyond that?
Well, OPPD at 32%, they've been buying most of the new wind projects. They bought the 200 megawatt project at Elgin several years ago, the 400 megawatt project in Holt County in the O'Neill area, and so with their announcement of the new project up in Wayne County, north of Wakefield, that's going to move OPPD up from 32 to in the upper 40s. That's a very significant additional increase. Lincoln Electric System is currently at 48%. Okay. NPPD is at 14%, based on their total generation portfolio. They're about 18% with just the things that they do for Nebraska customers or their native load. But our utilities in Nebraska, with OPPD really now clearly in the lead, have really moved forward the last 3 years, and we salute them because they are locking in energy that does not emit any carbon or use any water for 20 years at remarkably low rates. So it's good for us as customers and users and owners of the system. But it's even better for our kids and our grandkids as we look on down the road.
Okay. And how far should we go? I mean, I know that, for example, Hawaii just said that they're going to hit 70% renewable use by 2036. So the next 13 years, they expect to push it to 70%. Is that something that's reasonable for Nebraska to expect to hit that higher percentage eventually?
Well, what is the right number? The right number is the most you can do. And the faster you can do it, the better. Based on all of the data that we look at, and we've been following climate change for a very long time, we really need to focus on two things. And the amount of renewables we have is something in a positive that we can look at that says, yes, this is a good thing because we're attaining a higher percentage of green and renewable energy use. As a state, we don't have a clear policy. We think it would be a good idea for our state to set goals. We don't have state goals. We also no longer have clear national goals. When George W. Bush was president, he had a national goal of 20% wind and renewables by 2030. And so since that has come and gone, we no longer have clear goals that we as a people and as an industry can be working toward. The other thing to look at is to maximize the reduction, the rate at which we release additional carbon into an already carbon-saturated atmosphere, because those greenhouse gases are clearly speeding up the rate at which our climate is changing, and that is at an historic rate. And so the system is so large and it's so complicated that a long time after you take your foot off the foot feed, the momentum of that system continues to roll forward. So you can't wait until the train goes by in front of you. You have to be able to see it coming over time. So it behooves us to do as much as possible to reduce carbon emissions and to maximize renewable energy. Renewable energy is the future that we all want.
So what you're really saying is that when renewables in the past, we talked about it as a really good idea. Now it's become essential because of climate change. Do you want to talk about that a little?
In my work in trying to expand and work on renewable energy at the state and the national level, going back to the early 80s, renewable energy has always been a good idea. It's always made a lot of sense. It was waste not, want not. It was using your own resources. It was improving air quality. It was improving local economies. So all of those are good things. But the thing that has really overtaken us as a society is the very clear, overwhelmingly clear consensus of all of the science community who studies this issue, is that climate change has now taken renewable energy from being just a darn good idea and we ought to do more of it, to an imperative, to a necessity. And so when we look at the costs of making the structural changes to much more dramatically and in a much accelerated way implement renewable energy, and we look at costs, we need to look at what the real costs are of not doing that. And those costs far outweigh any of the structural changes or accommodations that we make in the short term. An ounce of prevention in the case of carbon emissions, as you think about it in the big picture, is worth many, many, many pounds of cure. And the more we do now, it yields big benefits on down the road.
Okay. What are Nebraskans' views on climate change? Do Nebraskans generally believe in it? I mean, we're talking right now, the State Board of Education is writing new science standards,
right.
Whether they're going to be teaching children that it's an established scientific fact or whether they're going to have a little wiggle room in there in terms of still a theory. What are your thoughts, or what do we know about what Nebraskans think about climate change? In
the case of renewable energy, every poll of the public that we've done since the 2004 area up to now, we end up with somewhere between 80 to 90+% of Nebraskans think that we need to not only support renewable energy, but we need to increase funding at the state and the federal level for renewable energy incentives. That's overwhelming. We have a hard time getting 90% of Nebraskans to support the Cornhuskers, and we're a Cornhusker state. So those are big numbers. And in the case of climate change, the University of Nebraska Rural Poll, which is a statewide poll that goes across the state, that has over 2,000 respondents, that's done by very reputable pollsters. And I've been a member of the advisory committee of the Rural Poll. We've taken a couple shots at what Nebraskans think in recent years. about climate change. The first poll was around 58% of Nebraskans thought that the state ought to get busy and put together a state climate plan. So they've moved past the business of do we or do we not have climate change going on. They're at the point, well, we need facts in order to be able to manage, and we ought to be planning for the future, and we ought to be dealing with this in a straight up, forthright, engaging kind of way. So we ran an even more clear question the year after, which was last year, and 61% thought we ought to have a state climate plan when we asked the question more clearly. And when you look at young folks who live in rural communities, then the numbers change dramatically, because the young folks overwhelmingly think we have to get a state climate plan. And so that has been part of our efforts with legislation to try to get the state to move forward with a state climate plan. It'd be nice if we could convince the governor that this was something that the state, from a strategic interest, ought to do. In our view, if you're going to be the governor of the state of Nebraska with our adverse impact from climate, and we're going to be adversely impacted by climate in our agricultural state, it behooves us to get busy and plan for the future and make this a priority, as the legislature should. And so this ought to be an issue that is kind of a no-brainer as we think about what our state needs to do. And from an agricultural standpoint, if you don't have facts and information, how do you plan?
Right. So have there been ever any interim studies done at all in terms of the legislature kind of moving in that direction, exploring what what we might need in terms of the state climate plan? Or
We've had we have a process that's going on right now that we wish would engage more stakeholders. There would be a broader based, more aggressive effort. We'll see how that comes out.
Okay.
But we're pushing, daylight is burning here. We want to be moving forward more aggressively. And we've kind of had some stops and some starts, but the time for just standing on the sidelines and watching is really over.
Okay. So viewers could really help by persuading or suggesting to their senator, hey, we need a state climate plan, or where are you on a state climate plan?
Exactly. It's a great question for a state senator, for any public official in the state of Nebraska, and with our federal delegation. And we are at a point in time where we really do need citizen engagement to move the state forward. And we have the natural resource base, we have the wind resources, we have the solar resources, which you need in order to be able to do renewable energy. We need the green-friendly state regulations and incentives that encourage it, and the federal incentives and regulations that do likewise, because when we can get the state and the federal working together, that's when we make real progress. And then all of that really happens when we have public officials that are willing to lead on green-friendly issues, and we encourage folks to step up and be those leaders. And then we need the business community to not just be waiting to see what happens, but actually joining with us. And we have some people in the business community that are far, far ahead of our public officials in recognizing the threat that climate change means to our society as a whole and our planet. And they are moving forward. So some of the wind that we're doing in Nebraska is in response to large companies saying we're going to be large energy users. We want that energy to be green. That helps shape the development. That gives our public power folks marching orders that they can try to help meet and find ways to do that. And then, at the end, we need citizens who are making this a priority in their lives as they engage with their public officials. And as we always say, get educated, get organized, get engaged, and stay there for the long term. Right.
And we have our public utilities, so they can certainly encourage and OPPD to continue to push forward with renewables. I mean, there may be certain standards, but there's nothing stopping them from going beyond what those standards are and achieving even more if it's possible.
Yes, and then it's a matter of planning and looking down the road and where do we want to be, where do we need to be on down the road. And the beauty of our unique Nebraska public power system is that you and I get to vote for the folks who sit on the board of directors of our local Rural Electric Association or our NPPD, Nebraska Public Power District Board of Directors, or the Omaha Public Board of Directors. And so the Omaha Public Power District has, I think, really been the beneficiary of our public power system and public engagement as the Board of Directors have been listening to the public they serve. The Lincoln Electric system is a differently structured entity, but it's a wholly owned entity of the city of Lincoln. So those board of directors are appointed by the mayor. But we have people who are there that we have access to. That's different than a private company, private utility setup, where those board of directors and that management team are very much focused on maximizing profits and not necessarily engaging with the public at large. So public power gives us the ability to help chart our own future.
Great. We have about a minute left, so talk a little bit about the 10th annual Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference that's coming up in November.
This is our 10th one. We bring together a wide range of stakeholders from all of the different disciplines, from solar, from wind, from private sector to public officials. It's a you all come. It's individuals, it's landowners, it's environmental interests, it's everybody interested in renewable energy. We all come together and get the latest and best information on a wide range of issues that impact wind and solar development, and together, as a result of that, we find a way forward.
Great. I'm assuming information on your website.
Yes.
Great.
And you can just Google Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, and there it is.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
For the League of Women Voters, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, and at election time, go vote, Omaha.